Good evening and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of you out here. This is the Christmas Eve edition of the Nutrition News Network. Hi everybody, I'm Brian Budd here today. We're just going to discuss a couple articles and some tips I kind of want to go over later on in the show. First off, I want to talk about genetically modified organisms, and those mean GMOs, and basically the ethics of it, and see if this is actually the case. Excuse me. And then also later on after this one, we'll talk about men's nutrients for a healthy sexual drive if you are 35 and older. It can help obviously some people that are a little bit younger if they're having some problems, but this is for more of 35 and older crowd. So kind of want to go over what's going on with GMOs. Genetically modified organisms are basically gene spliced organisms that they kind of changed the genetic code to get a different result. It kind of makes like apples last longer on the food shelves, or fruit last longer. It also makes food last longer. It also gives different variants to be, I don't want to say resistant to, bugs or things like that, especially like BT corn, which is genetically modified. I think 90% of it's modified. I'm not correct completely, but so it can resist obviously bugs, and of course pesticides are sprayed in there as well, and the pesticides are sometimes built into the fruit or vegetable, so that's kind of a concern, especially for human consumption. Also they've had in mice consumption the same issue, where in mice consumption that of course have basically overgrown organs in the mice, and that could become cancerous. So I don't know the whole story on it, but let's kind of go over what this one article did say. Now this is kind of like, and the thing is, I'm not necessarily saying that anything you eat genetically altered is bad per se. However, there is not enough research showing that we can tell. So basically this is an observation article from Scientific American. Now, Scientific American is in bed probably with the pharmaceutical industry, so a lot of their articles are probably paid by research by Pfizer and all these other drug companies. But it just says, are you scared of GMO foods? Ooh. And if so, new research says learning the science behind that could change your mind. And this is an article written on July 31st, 2009 by Jonathan McFreddes. And basically it says scientists can do some amazing things with genes, from saving papayas from extinction to making apples last longer before turning brown, to creating variants of crops to reduce pesticide use. Some of these things may sound too good to be true, and I understand if you're skeptical. How does this work? Is it safe? How do we know it's safe? What are the side effects? And if you're asking these questions, you're like many Americans who question the idea of genetically modified organisms. Now, I have to stop there. Number one, genetically modified organisms, from a personal experience, taste worse than actually conventional, organic, non-GMO fruit. I'm just going to be real about it. Bananas taste better than conventional bananas that are organic, or just, the GMO bananas. Same thing with corn. If you ever had sweet corn, I don't eat regular corn anymore because it is 90% of it, unless it's organic, 90% of it is genetically altered. I won't touch it. Also, too, sugar beets are genetically altered, so the sugar beets are genetically altered, so that becomes an issue as well. So with all these genetically altered organisms, now these GMOs were approved back probably, I think, in the mid-90s. During the Clinton administration, probably in 1992. And ever since then, there has been an increase in a lot of different variations or different problems arising from this. Now, I'm not saying they're bad, but at the same time, what they're saying here is genetic modification has come a long way since the ancient farmers first tinkered with the genes of the tessonite plant to develop corn we have today. Yes. You read that correctly. Genetic modification has been around since many centuries before we even knew genes existed. Although there are many techniques, all have achieved the same purpose: A genetically modified organism is an organism that has a genetic code. Elements of its DNA changed or modified in some way that displays a desirable characteristic. Now, the problem with that is that there are undesirable characteristics. Now, it depends on your blood type, it depends on your body composition, it depends on how your organs accept that, and they haven't really done a lot of studies on the effects of genetically modified foods on organs, or how they affect your liver, or how they affect your pancreas, how they affect your lungs, how they affect your throat, your eyes, your ears, whatever. It was just approved by the FDA in the early 90s as gospel, and they said, let's just fast track it. Now, there's a lot of proponents that'll sit there and say, of GMOs, and say that genetically modified organisms are good because it solves the problem we have with overpopulation. Now, number one, overpopulation, even if you believe in it, personally, I think that there's some cases there is a case for that, but there's some cases where it's kind of not the case because people are compacted. 90% of the population's in urban cities. So, I mean, you can fit the whole world's population in the state of Texas, everybody having a 750 square foot apartment with a half acre of land. So I don't necessarily buy into that population overgrowth, but I do talk about the economic impact of that. But I do believe that when you eat non-genetically altered foods, that you eat less of it. So a lot of these genetically altered foods affect hormone levels like ghrelin and neuropeptide Y, that are, NPY is basically short for neuropeptide Y. It's an satiation hormone, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone. So some of these do, obviously there's desirable characteristics in some respect, but there's also some undesirable characteristics that can affect ghrelin. It could cause your ghrelin levels to skyrocket 2 or 3 times, especially in genetically modified sugar beets. If you're addicted to, let's say, Mountain Dew, high fructose corn syrup is genetically modified sugar beets. So that is a problem there as well. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. However, there's not enough research to back up the basic premise of it being not to be feared. I'm not saying you shouldn't fear it, but you should always question everything. And I love how they say, well, you question things, so they're going to call people that like genetically, that don't like GMOs, conspiracy theorists. That's their famous line. Anyways, it says here, when you think of genetic modification, you may conjure up images of laboratories where scientists injecting plants and animals with various random chemicals. While genes can be modified using chemical and biological agents, yeah, BT corn, take a look at that. Both in nature and in the lab, modern genetic modification procedures are hardly random. The most advanced methods are such as the CRISPR, which are extremely precise and based on decades of research. Still, that might sound scary. Scientists are messing with the nature of an organism. After all, our genes are what make us, right? We can be sure of the effects. We mix genes with 2 different species. We can. If you eat something with modified genes that have an effect our own genes, it doesn't. Now, it doesn't. However, if you're eating GMO food, it can't be good for your liver if there's certain splices they use that might affect a certain person or not. And we've also heard the studies about how affected races, uses of weapons in food. Henry Kissinger talked about using food as a weapon in State Department Memorandum 202 back in 1973 about reducing the population by using food as a weapon. This is in the 70s he was talking about that. But I digress. So going on to this, these types of concerns are natural, but understanding the facts of GMOs requires a certain level of science knowledge that unfortunately many Americans lacked. Calling us all hayseeds. In fact, the recent studies place America around the middle of the pack when it comes to an understanding of science, just 24th out of 71 countries, and this lack of knowledge is likely to influence decisions people make about what to eat. In fact, the knowledge is the best predictor of one attributes of GM foods. Some research has shown that those who think they know the most about GM foods actually know less. have the most negative beliefs. This means that people who dislike GM are so because they don't know what GM foods are and how they're created. It's not really their fault, they say, as the underlying science involves complex questions. How do we know what certain genes does, and how would you even go about changing these genes, and what safeguards and testing procedures are involved? I mean, dude, there was an Indian scientist in the 1990s who was actually, bought a company and was talking, and I don't want to name the company because I don't want to get deleted, but about genetically modified potatoes. And he was talking about GMO potatoes, and he says, well, we need to have a double-blind placebo study on the effects. He's like, it's affecting rats and their livers. And they basically blackballed him to the point where he was never able to do research again. They threatened him. So to sit there and say, well, they don't really understand it, and most Americans are just dumb and blah, 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 and they don't understand science. I mean, yeah, you don't understand completely like the CRISPR gene or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I get that. But even in layman's terms, when you eat an organic grass-fed steak compared to a corn-fed steak, I'm sorry, you can tell a difference. There's no, well, I don't know. It's weird, but, I don't know why it is like that. And that's why it's also used because food is cheaper that way. And that's why a pound of ground chuck that is 85% 15 goes for about $6 a pound organic, and inorganic goes for genetically malted slime goes for $4 a pound. So, but they want us to eat crickets and think that's going to be okay. They just want a bunch of docile people to not be able to be strong and be able to have the diet they want. And that's basically all it is. In this article, I understand where people are coming from, like, well, it is confusing, but the thing is, if you do the research and you look at both sides, and there's a great book, it's called Fight for Your Health by Byron Richards. It goes to the FDA's betrayal of America, and basically it goes about what they're doing with this, the genetically GMOs and what it goes into, and I have a link up there, wellnessresources.com. Great book. I recommend to read it. It's really an eye-opener. And Byron Richards, God rest his soul, he's in heaven right now. He died in 2014, but he has really hit the nail on the head on this book. But really should go check it out. Okay, so all you men out there above 35, there's some nutrients that'll help with sexual health for 35 and up. Or if you're a man that's in their 20s or whatever, this might help you if you're a little low on the libido side. There's a couple things you can do. Obviously, nutrients. Number one, exercise is key. I would say that's pretty much number one, because exercise increases blood flow. Exercise also increases the friendly level of nitrous oxide, which is very good for blood flow, because blood flow, it takes a lot of blood flow to get down to that area. Also, vitamin D is important as well. Vitamin D is a steroid hormone, and steroid is made from of course, obviously steroid hormones are made from, steroids. They're made from your adrenal glands. So if you have high cortisol levels, you want to lower your cortisol levels, and that's the next nutrient. Vitamin C is very good for sexual health as you get older. Vitamin C, 1 to 3 grams a day in divided doses, very good for that, because what it does is it relaxes the cortisol levels to a normal level. If you have too high of a cortisol level, testosterone drops. It's very simple. The lower your cortisol levels are on average, the best bet is, of course, you're going to have higher amounts of testosterone, which is going to increase drive. Because a lot of these drugs that enhance, they're male enhancement pills, all they do is use COX-5 inhibitor type medications to go ahead and increase the blood flow, which is the unfriendly nitrous oxide, which is okay as long as you're not in a bad mood, because if you are, then you'll have an excitotoxic buzzsaw going through your brain while taking a blue pill. So It should be a last resort. Vitamin C is very good for relaxing, obviously, and building collagen, which is very good for men's area down there. Also, too, some amino acids that would be recommended would be L-citrulline, and L-arginine are very good. Very good for, of course, blood flow as well. And of course, exercise, like I said, cardio is good, but also weightlifting is good for increasing testosterone. But you don't want to exercise too much. Over exercising can cause a loss of libido because your body's trying to rest and recover, obviously get enough rest. And those are some nutrients as well. Make sure you're well hydrated, stay away from the alcohol, drink in moderation. And those are some things that'll help. Obviously, diet is important. Cut back on carbohydrates, eat more of a higher fat diet. Good fats like eggs, steak that is lean cut, fruits and vegetables. Stay away from refined carbohydrates. Those are very important to increase sexual health and stamina. So this has been the Christmas edition of the Nutrition News Network. I'm Brian Budd, and I want to wish baby Jesus a happy birthday, as well to all you lovely people out there. Please, if you want to, go ahead and click the subscribe button down there, so that way we can give you any update that's coming up, and I will talk to you soon.
These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This show or products appearing on the show are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Nutrition News Network. All rights reserved. Copyright 2019.